What's up, CSL? Coach Fury back here again today, and I'm joined here again with Miles. Miles, you're becoming a bit of a regular here. Does that count if it's 2 times as a regular?
I mean, it's all in how many guests you have and how many you got. You know, if I'm 2 out of 2, I guess then I'm the regular.
You are the regular. I haven't had anyone else on yet, so you certainly are. So I mean, there's a lot to talk about today. A lot to talk about. But before we kind of go on and talk about the chaos that's happened over the weekend, I just wanted to sort of talk to the guys that are sort of listening to this about the playthrough series that you've been doing with the Chicago Bulls. On, I think it's DDS 17 you've been using for it.
Yeah, DDS 17. I mean, I was inspired by Chili actually to do this because he had posted an old playthrough that he had done with like a late 90s Raptors team, and it reminded me of like why I got into DDS in the first place. Like when I first played, I think it was Pro Basketball 2, way back in like early 2011. I was doing single player first, and I was writing dynasties. I was pretty active on the Wolverine, forum, and so seeing Chili's, kind of playthrough brought me back to that and inspired me to start my own. So I did one with the Phoenix Suns, and now I'm just about to start the playoffs with the 2010-2011 Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, I mean, it was. If I go back to my Sim League history or my basketball management games history, I played the first Draft Day Sports, and that was what sort of got me the bug. And similar to you, I played a lot of single player, and it was actually Jester's write-ups that he was doing at the time on the Wolverine Studios that kind of drew me into Sim Leagues, because I sort of was fascinated by it, and he I think was writing at the time about one of the Sim Leagues that was going on. I can't remember which one, and that kind of drew me in really. But I really want to talk to you about the Chicago thing, because I think it's been really interesting. It's quite a nice little snippet that's been on the forum to sort of talk about and go through. And it's something a little bit different really, but I mean at the moment obviously you've made that trade for Chauncey Billups, and you've had a fairly successful season. I mean obviously top seed in the East. I mean what do you think your chances are of upsetting sort of the Eastern Conference and trying to dethrone the Miami Heat? Surprisingly, I was quite surprised they're only a 3rd seed with a pretty mediocre record really.
Yeah, that surprised me too, because I was watching their progress obviously closely throughout the whole season, as they were the main, motivation for my team was like, all right, can I take down this, this Heat team that couldn't be taken down in real life? They really didn't figure out the 3-star dynamic. Chris Bosh sucked for 3 months straight. I don't mean oh, he had 16 points a game. No, I mean 11 points on 38% shooting sucked. And so they finally figured out. The one thing, though, that the AI really sucks at is the sub-matrix. Their most used lineup is their starters, obviously, and they're very good. Historic level good with their starters. Their second most used lineups is their entire bench, and that is, historically bad. And so, for them, they would be so much better if the AI just learned to stagger, the big three, but that's just not something that the game's equipped to handle. And so I'm hoping that in the playoffs, those guys just play more minutes, and it makes it less easy to beat them as it was in the regular season. But we'll see how it goes. We won't match up with them until the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think that we're a lock to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, just because there are a few good teams and a few surprise teams in the East. One that really surprised me and has me worried is the Charlotte Bobcats. Because they don't have any stars, but they don't have any weaknesses. And so, they have a lot of defense all over the court. And so that's the kind of thing that, if Derrick Rose has 1 or 2 off games, they could beat us on the strength of their whole team. Whereas we're kind of built around 1 or 2 guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's been fun to follow along. In terms of, for me, what drew me into this was I'm a massive Chauncey Billups fan, being a Detroit fan, so I love the fact that you picked him up. I think he's a great addition to that Bulls roster, because he sort of brings a bit of a balance to Rose in the backcourt. For me, I think it'll be really interesting to see how how you go, like you said, against the Bobcats. I think that's going to be the toughest game you'll face before you get to the conference finals. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, in terms of next season, I mean, what I found. I mean, I've got DDS 17, and I found that you tend to see the teams that are sort of have the stars do have that star pulling power on it. So one of the playthroughs that I've been doing on the channel has been with the LA Lakers and trying to bring them back to a championship team, which has been incredibly difficult. But I found with that Golden State, with the likes of Durant and Thompson and Green and Curry, etc. When they go into the off season, they look for players. They seem to manage to get these unbelievable deals in terms of signing people for minimum salary deals that shouldn't be going for minimum salary deals. So it'd be interesting to see how the game handles the Heat in the off season, whether they have that pulling power that they had. But I had experienced similar with Golden State, because that make it really difficult for you next season, I think.
I haven't made it so much in 17. I played with the Suns. I was done after one season. Obviously in the middle of the school season, and then I just haven't done too much single player, so I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. But I'm looking forward to it. And in all honesty, I am hoping. I'm trying to win, but there's a small part of me that's hoping that I don't win it in the first year, because I do want that challenge.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I'll say before we sort of go and talk about some of the bigger topics in CSL, the things that have been churning away this weekend, is I'm surprised you're not playing Chauncey Billups more minutes over Kyle Korver when you're looking at his season stats. I mean, I don't know whether... I mean, I haven't seen your lineups. Has Korver been better in your lineup situations than Billups, or is that just a decision that we'll split them 50-50 because they bring some different types of skill set?
So part of it is because when we brought Billups on, our best lineup up to that point was a Rose, Korver, Dang, Gibson, Noah lineup. So I decided to make that my starting five, because they had been fantastic, and they continue to be great. That's a good line, and that's one of the things that I've really emphasized in 17, because we have lineup tracking. I've made it a point to try and put as much of my top attention to, like I used to pay attention a lot to what lineups worked well with CJ Watson, and because Watson was in season, we've been all we play well along. That's something I really paid attention to. I knew that I wanted Korver to get minutes, that I didn't want Billups to play the whole game, because there's no sense in losing players to injury during the regular season, which I lost Billups to injury anyway, but I still wanted to try and achieve that balance of like a solid 8 or 9 man rotation. I guarantee you, as the playoffs go on, Billups' minutes will go up, Korver's minutes will go down, but it's still going to be a situational thing.
Okay, I think we lost you a little bit through there with some signal, but I think basically what I think you were trying to say was, correct me if I'm wrong, was in your lineups Korver was proving better before you signed Billups, and basically you've been using Billups for a bit of balance in there, and it sounds like through the playoffs he may be getting some more minutes as you sort of go towards the finals.
That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, anyone who hasn't checked out your playthrough series, it's worth checking out on the forum, because it's a nice little bit of light-hearted sort of reading through, something a little bit different really. So let's begin with the big topics. So obviously we've had the All-Star game. There's obviously a whole host of questions and a whole host of things happening there. Then there's been some pretty dramatic trades that have happened this weekend, and I'm pretty much going to open up to you, Miles. Where on earth do you want to start with this, and we'll try and pick it apart piece by piece as we go along.
I think we should save, and I think pretty dramatic is underselling it. I think this was the biggest day of trades in the history of sim leagues, not just CSL, not just DDS, not just this century, but in simulation leagues ever. That might be overselling a little bit, but it was a huge day of trades. I think we should save that for the end so that the listeners have something to keep on listening for.
Okay.
So they stay on.
You've oversold it. I think I've undersold it. So we're somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between.
Absolutely. So should we just do the All-Star stuff and get that out of the way then? And
that's a good place to start.
Okay. So Let me find the page. Here we go. So, I've got up on the screen just for your reference, Miles. Just the post that the guys did for the games box scores, etc. Obviously, there's some debate around some starters or not. I mean, is there anything that you saw when you were flicking through that made you think, why did he not get a nod, or why was he in the one of the lineups?
Well, the big controversy obviously is in the West, where Kevin Durant was voted a starter. The 5 guys that started the game for the West were the 5 guys I personally voted for as starters. Now, a lot of people made a great point that Durant didn't play enough games to warrant being in the All-Star game. For me, him coming back, even though he'd only played 12 or 13 games, he was playing like an All-Star. No, he was playing like an MVP candidate. I mean, he had a 50-point game, right? Like in his first 10 games. And so for me, it was like he clearly is an all-star player. He's clearly an all-star caliber player. And for him to come back and be at that level so quickly, for me was like, if there's no minimum, then he earned it. Now, if the league had put a minimum on games played, and I feel like that might be something that happens in the future, then obviously it's not a conversation, and Kevin Durant would have been ineligible. But for me, if he's eligible, he's worth it. And so, obviously, like I said, a lot of people have differing opinions on that. But that was the one for me. The big controversy in the West was Kevin Durant. Should he have been a starter? Should he have been on the team at all? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about this, I mean, I personally, so obviously he was on my roster until a couple of hours ago. He was one who I didn't vote for him, and for the exact reason you articulated there. Yes, he is an all-star player. There's no question about that. But I felt that he hadn't played enough games, and therefore he wasn't worthy of a starter. For me, I put in, if I remember who I put in, I think I put in possibly may have been Exum as a forward, I think, if I remember my all-star voting, because I think he's had a really good season, and he's played the games, and for me, I felt that Durant hadn't played the games. If he'd have played, I reckon, probably another 20 or so games, absolutely, I'd have voted for him. So perhaps that's a little bit telling that, he was on my roster, I didn't vote for him, possibly.
Well, you couldn't vote for him. That was also part of the rules, right? Right, Chris? You remember that, right? Right, Chris?
So I didn't know that, because I didn't see that role. But that's fine. I didn't even consider that. So, that's a bit of a crazy logic for you. I didn't even know you can vote for your own guys. I didn't vote for my own guys anyway.
Him, so I guess I mean that says it all, though. If the general manager of the team that Kevin Durant had been playing for at the time says that he was not an all-star, I guess maybe that should have been the sign to the rest of us that he shouldn't have been an all-star. But I thought he was worthy. Chris Middleton definitely was also worthy. He was the guy that tied Durant for that spot. I think Middleton would have been absolutely deserving of being a starter. I think LeBron James deserved consideration as well. So it's just, there was definitely the West was very stacked. And Exum, of course, you mentioned Exum. Exum deserved consideration as well, though I had him in as a guard.
Yeah, I mean, the other one that I voted for that I was surprised didn't at least get like a wild card entry was Cody Zeller. I think he's had a really good season, and Memphis have been doing really well, and I felt that he deserved a little bit of a nod, possibly for me personally over Stanley Johnson. I mean, Oklahoma City haven't been as electric. I know Johnson's been injured for a period of time, but for me, I think Zeller was one that I felt that probably may have deserved at least a shout at getting on the bench for the West.
I agree with that. I think that he deserved consideration. I don't know if there's anyone that you can look at who was on the team that you can say should not have been on the team for Zeller. I guess depending on your opinion of Durant. I think Stanley Johnson absolutely deserved to be on the team, and there's really no question about that. The West was just incredibly tough overall. There's so many great players out in the West. And then the East was also tough, but in a different way. Because the East, that front court.
Go on.
I was going to say the front court was really difficult out East to try to find like 6 players worth voting for.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that by the voting. I mean, how on earth Carmelo Anthony got votes? The guy hasn't even been playing for goodness knows how many games now, and he still managed to get a vote in first place vote for some reason, which is crazy. Yeah, I mean, you look at the starting guys, and you can't really argue with that for the East. In the forward positions, so you've got Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Andre Drummond. I mean, they're your locks, aren't they? They're the ones that you can't expect to be there. The guys that are left, I mean, Jabari Parker. I mean, for me, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, when I vote for All-Star games, I vote for based on record as well, not just performance, because no point putting up useless stats on a rubbish team. So for me, Jabari Parker was a question mark. I didn't vote for him. He's putting up numbers, but the team isn't. It's not really generating wins for that team.
Right.
Same with some of the other guys. I mean, flicking through here, I mean, I gave Blake Griffin a nod I think as a second place position in the forwards, because Cleveland have been playing well and he's been playing well. So
interesting.
I mean, that's how I tend to vote. I don't tend to look at numbers. I tend to look at what teams are actually performing well, because for me, the whole purpose of an All-Star game is that it's meant to be the best players on the best teams playing against each other. Some other people may feel different, but that's my opinion.
That's definitely a great point. And as far as like the best players on a great team, obviously, like part of that understanding is also that sometimes a really good player doesn't put up the same stat line that Jabari Parker's putting up. Like, for example, maybe a player who's better than Jabari isn't putting up the same numbers simply because Jabari is doing it all by himself versus this other player is on a team where he's got two other stars to share the ball with. Just as an example, like that could be a great reason for your kind of mindset when it comes to voting. For me, I really don't look at record. The way I see it is you're an all-star if you are balling out on the court. And Jabari Parker, to me, there's no two ways about it. Not only is he putting up the counting stats, but he's also doing so efficiently. We're not talking about this guy's chucking up 30 shots a game, and of course he's getting those numbers because he's doing a great job. So that's why for me a guy like Parker is an all-star, or some of the other players from these not so great teams that I voted for. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and I guess that means that we're always going to have some controversial picks in All-Star games because people view the voting differently.
Absolutely, and that's part of the fun of it too. Is kind of seeing how everyone approaches it a little bit differently. It would kind of be boring if everyone received the same exact votes and the same. We all agreed on who the starter should be. I think it's cool that there's that kind of dissension or difference of opinion. Yeah,
absolutely. So I mean, in terms of the actual game itself, I mean, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion, I think, but. It was still close. I mean, it was only 6 points in it, but I mean, if the West didn't win that, there would be some sort of travesty, I think, based on the amount of depth that All-Star team has, really. Westbrook picking up the honours of the MVP of the game with a pretty good stat line, to say the least. 34 points, 11 of 18, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal.
I mean, is anyone surprised that Westbrook dominated the All-Star game? Westbrook was made for these types of situations. One of the things that makes Westbrook such an amazing player is that it doesn't matter who's on the other side of him. Whether he's going up against a great player or an awful player, he's still going to go out there and have a great game and play to his hardest. And as you can see, he did that in the All-Star game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just sort of got the bit of the box score up. The guys can hopefully see a little bit of it, but just having a look to see if there's anyone else that really stood out. I mean, James Harden did pretty well, 8 of 17, 24 points. Looks like he grabs a couple of rebounds, a couple of assists. But no question that Westbrook was definitely the best player on the day. And I mean, talking about moves and things, I mean, it's one of those things now, you look at this and the whole All-Star voting, it may have been completely different now after this weekend, but interesting to see that the guys like, for example, Anthony Davis had a stat line of 5 minutes. So I'm guessing he got injured during the All-Star game. He had one shot which went in, and just one assist and 2 steals in sort of 5 minutes. So I mean, sounds like he may have got injured. So
he was probably just too good, to be honest. And the West coach was like, "Well, this isn't going to be any fun if we just leave Anthony Davis out, because East doesn't have anyone that can keep up with him." So that's probably what it really was. I mean, what was that? 2 steals and a made bucket and a rebound in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, he must have just decided he's had enough and just walked off and decided he's going to do some autographs or something, because there's no way he'd have only played 5 minutes.
Maybe the All-Star game. Maybe the All-Star game was in. Maybe the All-Star game was in New Orleans, and he was like, "Well, I'm just going to go back home now and play some 2K or something."
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, I mean, that's the All-Star game. I mean, we're now sort of over that hump, and we're sort of in middle season now, and trade deadline, I think, is it tonight? It's going to be, I think.
Yeah. Trade deadline is whenever the Simmer decides to lock things up today. So I'd say you're probably safe with about maybe 10 hours or so. You can feel safe.
Yeah. So I mean, from what I've heard, I mean, there's still a couple of things that might be happening. I don't think there's anything on the scale of what we're going to discuss in a minute, but we may see a couple of other minor moves. See how that goes.
Yeah, I can easily see some contenders still out there buying. I'm still, if it was someone besides Manu, or if Manu was more active on social media, I think Melo would get moved today. But Manu's kind of a slower negotiator and only on the forum, so there's a chance that Melo actually stays with Milwaukee after the deadline. I think that's might be like the biggest name that might still get traded. Maybe Conley gets moved, but I don't think we're definitely not seeing anything like what we saw this weekend.
No, I mean, I think Conley will stay. I think I don't know. I think I can see him staying, but Melo I can also see staying. I'll say that now. But do you think it's because there's been a lot of discussion around the price for Melo. Obviously, it's an expiring contract.
The price is ridiculous.
It's arguably too high for anyone who's looking to buy, possibly.
Absolutely. The price that Manu is asking for is absolutely ridiculous. I inquired about Melo, to be honest, a couple weeks ago, just as, in my mind, I don't have my pick. I offered some expiring contracts and either his choice of some young players or some second-round picks, just so that I could have a more competitive team this year, and then Melo walks, and it's, you know what I mean? It was just for the next couple months, and Manu told me that he's looking for either a first-round pick or like a young player with real potential. Probably someone like I just traded for in Kelly Oubre, and I'm thinking, there's no way in hell anyone gives him that for Melo. Especially there's so much supply. If Melo was like the only player on the trade block, that was the only player that anyone that was willing to trade away, then yeah, I mean, he might be worth it. But you don't want Melo. There's plenty of teams that are still trading off decent players. You're not going to be able to get that price if you're not the only seller on the market.
No, and I think his contract is a stumbling block to begin with anyway. So obviously the teams that will be after him will be the teams that are in the playoff hunt, or these teams that are looking to sort of patch benches and patch some starting depth, and to actually get him, they're going to have to put quite a lot down just in terms of contracts, which probably puts a lot of people off, because if they're thinking they've got to put down a contract and then probably a first round pick to get him, it's probably too much. So I mean, the question is, if Melo doesn't move, does Manu just cut him? He's not playing, or does he sit him on the bench?
I think the reason why Manu doesn't cut him is because if Manu cuts him, then if this situation or similar situation ever arises in the future, then people will know Manu is the type of person to waive the player after the trade deadline, and then they'll just wait to put in a claim. Right now, obviously, like, that's not a guarantee that you'll get the player. I guarantee if Manu gets waived, I could see at least 10 teams putting in a claim, because Melo's easily the best player to ever hit the waiver wire if that's the case. But for that reason alone, I don't think that he's going to, because I think that he wants to maintain that. I I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but that way in the future people don't wait him out for the buyout market again.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. So it looks like Carmelo's going to spend his time sitting on the bench collecting his salary. Then doesn't look like he's going to move, I think. So let's move on to some of the trades that actually have happened. Where on earth do you want to begin? That is my question to you.
I think we really have to start with the one that's on everyone's mind, and that's obviously Michael Carter-Williams and Tyrone Wallace. To me, for Darren Williams, Rodney Hood. I can't even remember who I gave up. Mindaugas Kuzminskas. Hey, Mindaugas Kuzminskas is in New York. He can use real pictures. I always love it when that happens, because then we can see real pictures of players in our articles. That's obviously the biggest trade. I'll say right now, I know everyone's thinking it. Yes, Tyrone Wallace is the best player in the deal. I'm so thrilled to have him. He was the player that I was after, and I just want to see how he plays with our team. Obviously, this isn't, I'm not really looking to see how he plays with particular players because my team is in flux, but I just want to see up close if he's something worth, bringing back in the offseason. I think he is. I think he's got the skills. And Michael Carter-Williams is a basketball player, and so that he will play basketball for us. I don't know at what position or how many minutes, but he's on our roster, so I guess we could use him.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic first trade to start with. I have to say, you've completely bamboozled the audience, I think, with this one. But with them, I will say a couple of things on this. So, for me, I like the deal for you because I like Tyrone Wallace. I was looking at trying to acquire him for about a month or so now, but for me, the price was too high. I didn't have any assets to sort of throw at sort of New York's way, really, to acquire him. I would be very interested to see how he does with you, and whether you can sort of try and fix some of that shooting issue that he's had that seems to have plagued his whole career so far. But he seems like a good defender, and he can play a couple of positions, which is always really good. For Carter Williams, I'm not a fan. I'll admit, I'm not a fan of Carter Williams. He's just another guy who just puts up bucket after bucket, and I say bucket, it's brick after brick, but I mean, he's expiring, so worth a gamble. But are you thinking of playing him? I'm guessing off the bench, not starting him.
To be honest, so I haven't really looked too much, because for me, what I want to see is maybe are Carter Williams and Wallace more successful at other positions, and so I kind of want to look a little bit more closely and try to step back and not think of them as point guard Michael Carter Williams or small forward Tyrone Wallace, but just look at the ratings and what they can do and kind of put on my dentist glasses and see if I can just throw them in other positions and make them all-stars somehow, like we've done with
a bit of Dennis magic. That's what you're hoping for.
Yeah, exactly. I just kind of want to see, and I've done this in the past couple times. When I first started with Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, I threw him at point guard to see if that defense would be worth the offense, and then Doug went and took him and made him successful as a big man, and then with Kyle Anderson, I tried to see if he would be successful at power forward, and then Dennis took him and made him better at center. So basically, someone else is going to take Tyrone Wallace and Michael Carter-Williams this offseason and do way better with them than I ever did, is the moral of the story. So
I mean, I would like to see Tyrone Wallace try and play a bit of the 2 and maybe the 4. His rebounding stats aren't dire. He can probably play some minutes in a sort of post position. That could be interesting to try, because his passing and handling is fairly good, so he could comfortably play the 2.
Yep.
I mean,
so
if I was you, perhaps even just try him at centre. I mean, we've seen with Anderson Anderson's slightly different, obviously, but I mean, we've seen, seems to be the solution seems to be to chuck guys like that in at centre and just see how they do. Maybe.
Yep. Maybe. We'll see. Yeah, exactly. We'll see. Now, we spent way too much time on this joke of a trade. Let's talk about, so we just talked about my trade. Let's talk about your trade, because your trade is by far, I think it's the one that has generated the most discussion. Whether it's the biggest trade or not, obviously it's up for contention, but it's definitely the one that has been most talked about. So tell us, what happened? How did that happen?
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's the biggest trade, because the one we'll probably talk about after this, I think, is the biggest trade, just because of the number of stars that actually moved team. Was dramatic in itself. But I mean, in terms of this deal, so I mean, it's been no secret that we've been thinking about Kevin Durant for a while, pretty much ever since I took over the team. We knew what we were going to get with him, but my concern was that the team itself, we didn't have any assets. So yes, it's brilliant to have someone like Kevin Durant, who is just an absolutely insane machine on draft day sports for some reason. But we didn't have any assets that we could go and build a team around. And the biggest problem that Portland faced was that they changed their general manager 3 times in the off-season, which meant they lost DeAndre Jordan, who was, in my opinion, a massive loss for that organisation, really.
Undoubtedly.
Which basically took this team from a contender in the West, probably. I mean, a couple of balancing issues and questions you may have had to address there, to what is basically a bottom seed playoff team, realistically. Because we just had that hole at centre and we had that hole in the front court, combined with the fact that they traded for Josh Smith. Josh Smith's been doing really well for us, I have to say, but we lost that Carmelo Anthony factor, who I felt could play a really effective position at the 4 for us. So there were some big questions anyway to begin with. We were basically playing a wait and see game when Durant came back, to see how he did, if he could bring us back up to that level and sort of really overplay, really was what we were looking for. Bit of a mixed bag. I mean, he is an absolute elite talent and he is a scorer, but despite having him, we still had a front court problem, basically, which meant that we were never going to get back up to being a title contender without doing something dramatic, really.
Right.
We looked at trying to move the likes of Hayward and Smith. There wasn't really anything that I felt I could get that would really put us back in, or at least make us sort of take that sideways step to improve. So, I mean, people have criticised this one because he wasn't on the trade block, but I always find if you put a star on the trade block, his value diminishes instantly because people think he's suddenly available for cheap. So the teams that were contacted were basically the ones that we'd already been speaking to basically throughout the season, who were already interested in Durant, and we felt had the assets to acquire him, really. So in terms of this move, obviously we instantly take a step back because we lose our best player. But for me, acquiring the likes of Smart, Mirotic and that Minnesota pick basically keep us on par of where we are, which is a borderline playoff team at the moment. The hope and the gamble is that the Minnesota pick becomes a top pick in this season's draft, and that will allow us to take that further step forward from where we are, from being a sort of middling playoff team to hopefully pushing into a top 4 playoff team in the next couple of years, really. So that was the logic behind it, really. Interested to hear your thoughts and what you think about it. I mean, probably
honestly, so I got to say that one of the biggest things that I noticed after, I mean, both trades were made, is I don't think I've really seen in the past players, like a star player, get traded for such a fair package. It very rarely happens where you actually get at least close to fair value for a star, and I think that you got close to fair value for Kevin Durant here. I don't think anyone can ever really truly approach fair value unless you get a star back. But I think one of the best things that you can ask for, if you can't get that literal current star, is a lottery ticket for that star. And Minnesota's lottery ticket here is, I'm not sure you can get a better one. It looks like it's going to be a fantastic pick. Even if it doesn't jump up in the lottery, you still have a top 5 pick. And there's, no shame in that, especially because a lot of times we screw up with the top couple of picks. So you can always find great players. I mean, Indiana right now is being led by George Zapala, who was the 3rd overall pick, only because I screwed up and took Justin Anderson 2nd. These things happen. So I think that, along with Smart, who is one of the youngest, or not youngest players in the league, but He's one of the young, really good players in the league. He's locked up for 4 years already, so you don't have to worry about any free agent shenanigans. And he's the kind of player that you can count on to really contribute for you. Mirotic is young. In my mind, I don't think you could have done better. And especially, if you did what you'd said and contacted all the teams that had the assets you're looking for, I don't know if you could have done better for Durant. So I think this was a really, really great trade for you. And I think it's a great trade for the Bulls, too. They're a team that's, in a position to win it all. And I think sometimes you have to make those all-in moves. And it really sucks that Marcos couldn't find the motivation to keep going for whatever reason. But he's a great guy, and I know that he wouldn't leave if it wasn't for a really good reason, especially with what the league means to him. So I think we'll see Marcos back one day, but I think Chicago will be fine in the meantime, at least for this season, because it's a dangerous team they've got.
Yeah, I mean, it was a shock Marcos deciding to sort of leave. I mean, obviously you must have some perfectly understandable reasons for it, and wish him all the best. I mean, talking about the Bulls and the team they have now, for me, this is a team that I'm really excited to see. Not just because they've taken Durant and being from our team, I'm interested to see how he does with some better players, basically. Let's not beat around the bush, some better players. But I think in terms of the balance of that team, it's going to be really, really fascinating to see. It's a shame that Marcos obviously isn't there, because I feel he would have got the absolute best out of this team. I mean, they're definitely going to be in the playoffs, and a lot of it's going to come down to matchups. But when you look at it on paper, you've got Lawson, who is a really, really good point guard. They've got Batum, who they can throw at any offensive threat that they're facing, who can just lock them down. He's still a really, really, really good defender. You have Durant, who you can move around, who will just, he's going to score you at least 25 points a game to 30 points comfortably. And then you've got the likes of Horford there, who is seems to be a bit of a playoff machine at times. So for me, it's going to be really interesting to see how they do. If Marcus was there, I'd have said that they're going to be challenging for the title, and I still think they will be challenging for the title. Hopefully, the league sort of does something logical and either puts someone in Marcus's place straight away once he's sort of definitely confirmed that he's going, or if he comes back, fantastic. But hopefully they don't just leave this team to just rot and put rubbish sub-matrices together, because that would be such a shame. Because this team can really, really challenge in the East this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, in my opinion, this team is, unless Marcos comes back, in my opinion, this team is eliminated from contention, because there's no obvious replacement. It's not like we had in the past year or so when you and Phil were hanging around the league without a team, where we knew someone who had DDS experience was taking over, had multiplayer experience was taking over. Unless someone comes in out of nowhere, this Chicago team will either A, be taken over by someone who either doesn't have multiplayer experience or doesn't have DDS experience, and so they won't be able to maximize that Bulls team, or it'll be league taken care of, which I know John and Doug, and I know that they'll do their best to make sure that the Chicago team is at least competitive, but it's not their job to win playoff games for them. And so for that reason, I just, Chicago's really talented, but it's really difficult for the computer to beat smart GMs, and we have a lot of those in this league.
Yeah. I really hope that it doesn't go to waste. That's all. I mean, for me, I'll say it straight away. I mean, it may be worth if there isn't someone to step in and take over, then when it comes to playoff time, perhaps one of the GMs who are out of the playoffs could perhaps just, the league could contact them and just run this team for the playoffs, just to get the best out, or try and get the best out of this team, because that team should be a contending team. That
is a really good suggestion. I actually really like that suggestion, because I agree with you. I think it is actually a disservice to the league for the Bulls to not be run. And I think that at the very least there should be someone who can watch over the team and make sure that they play to their best potential. I'm sure the rest of the Eastern GMs don't want that to happen because they would prefer to just beat the Bulls. But I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it would be more rewarding for whatever Eastern GM does come out of the East to beat an actual Bulls team run by an actual person. So
yeah, I mean,
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, the one that I can think of the top of my head, I'd love to see try and run this Bulls team in the absence of Marcos is Manu, because he hasn't really proven it in the CSL yet. He's had a really, really tough situation with Milwaukee, and he's plugging away with them. But historically, from leagues I've been in, he has always seems to just get the best out of some of the players that he has. And I would be really interested to see how he does with that Bulls team, because that's probably what would be one of the best teams he's ever had. And we know, if any of those of you who are listening who've been in the NLL, he was the Bulls GM there, and that team had a real mixture of players, and they seem to always appear in playoffs and conference finals, and people were wondering why. So I'd would love to see that, because it might give him a little bit of a something to sort of think about during the playoff time, rather than just looking at the lottery. And for historically, he's done well with teams and strategizing. So I would like to see that one happen.
Yeah, and specifically because I won't have to play in the playoffs, I am all for that plan, because Manu was the biggest thorn in my side. I don't know how, but my Charlotte Bobcats team always seemed to match up with his Bulls every year in the playoffs. And I'm pretty sure 90% of the times I was eliminated from the playoffs, it was because Manu and his stupid strats that I couldn't quite figure out. There was one year, I think it was the one year I beat him, that he was really struggling with injuries. I remember looking at a sub-matrix after one of our games, and he had run 2 lineups concurrently, like a Michael Conley-led unit, and then like a Costa Kufos-led unit. He literally, every 2 minutes, like every single row of the sub-matrix was alternating lineups. So they'd be out there for 2 minutes sub, 2 minutes sub. And I'm like, how am I supposed to, do I even prepare for this? I don't know what to do. I don't understand it. We beat them, but it's those little things that he's willing to try. Obviously, that was crazy, but it's those little things that he's willing to try that made him a great strategizer in the NLL. And you're right, I would love to see him with something to work with here in the CSL. Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, it's interesting because I believe this trade was posted after... Well, regardless of when it was posted, this other big trade was obviously agreed to before Biz knew that Durant was leaving Portland.
So I'll step in there. So from as far as I know, obviously I'm on one side of this sort of domino effect. The Durant deal was more or less confirmed prior to the James Harden deal, and they kind of seemed to act in sort of unison, didn't they? Because we kind of put this one up, and then the other one sort of came up, and it was almost like they were both domino effects for each other, because there were some teams that were involved in some of the discussions that were involved in both deals, that were looking to try and make both deals. There were some crazy things going on. I mean, there was at one point, there was one team that I won't mention, but possibly was in the running for both, which would have been absolutely crazy. I don't know how they'd have quite pulled it off, but they were in the running for potentially getting both, with completely different sets of players and personnel moving place. But it was a fascinating thing to watch, because for myself, I was on one side of it, and I knew what I had going on, but then there was sort of this, I was getting snippets of things out of there because there were some teams involved, but then there were some other bits that I wasn't necessarily seeing, and they kind of seemed to come to sort of conclusion at the same point, and then literally fired one after the other on the forum. It was crazy, absolutely crazy.
Interesting. I had no idea about any of the behind the scenes stuff. I think I can think of a team that might have been able to acquire both, but we won't get too far down that rabbit hole. But what I'm really curious about is, obviously everyone kind of said Portland was going to be the 8th seed. Kevin Durant's back. That team was almost the 8th seed, or right around the 8th seed without Durant. These are the things that you saw in the forum, right? Everyone was saying that. Yeah. So trading away Durant, obviously getting Smart back, you're still a playoff hopeful. I think everyone can agree that you still have what it takes to make the 8th seed. but now it's less certain, right? Like now there's more of a question mark as to whether or not you can maintain your hold on the 8th seed without Durant. Oklahoma City's right there in the running, and then Houston's not that far back. And I know that Biz, I think Biz needed to trade Harden just because I think that there's a need for, in these sim leagues, for people to kind of switch it up every now and then, just because he had Harden for so many years. But I wonder if there's a little small part of Biz that wondered if he could have made the 8th seed now had he kept Harden and you traded Durant. But I don't know how. Obviously, that's not that relevant considering Harden is traded. He's traded to Dallas, which easily has the most stars on the team.
Yeah.
I mean, are they the favorite to come out of the West now with Isaiah Austin injured and LeBron, Harden, and Curry all on the same team?
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, we'll talk about the specifics of the trade in a minute, but from a neutral, just watching this deal go down and just watching the league in general, I mean, it's really interesting to see how people build their teams. So, I mean, Dallas is very much we'll just get the best players we possibly can in all the positions, and then we'll think about how it works. Then you've got teams like Memphis, I'll say, and Phoenix to an extent, where they build on a certain strategy or a certain way they play, or just try to acquire players who fit a certain purpose. I mean, there's no denying that even with this trade, that Dallas do have the best on paper roster in the entire league. How it all fits together is going to be really, really interesting. I mean, you've got the likes of, I mean, let's think about how they're going to line up. So they have Harden. Simmons didn't move, did he? I don't think so. You've got Harden, Simmons, James, Biyombo. I mean, Curry, Ibaka. I mean, absolutely crazy. How that's all going to mesh together, I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, in the West, they probably are comfortably the favourites now, with Phoenix losing Austin.
Yeah. And yeah, it's definitely between them. Sacramento has to be considered, especially now that they have Westbrook.
Yeah.
Sacramento is definitely in that picture. The West is very strong. There's a lot of good teams. I think that there's a top 7 in the West, in my opinion. And I think there's a clear delineation between the top 3 and the middle 4, with the top 3 being Phoenix, Sacramento, and Dallas, and then the next 4 being San Antonio, Memphis. I'm not looking at the standings right now, so I'm trying to remember who all's up there.
So you've got Utah. I mean, in terms of the top teams, you've got Utah, Suns, Kings, Dallas, Spurs. I mean, the Spurs obviously made some dramatic moves earlier in the season. Then, I mean, below that, you've still got Memphis. I mean, then you're looking at probably after that. I mean, the Pelicans, Houston still are in the running. I mean, they're 25 and 29. They're still outside threat. Oklahoma City, obviously, we mentioned. They're probably the teams that I can think that are still in the hunt for playoff positions. But the top ones are Dallas, San Antonio, Utah, Phoenix, Sacramento, really.
Yeah, so for me, it's a top 3, and that's Phoenix, Sacramento, and Dallas. I know San Antonio has a better regular season record than Sacramento, and they're real close to Dallas, but I don't think San Antonio has a playoff roster. I think there's a difference between a regular season and a playoff roster, and I think San Antonio has a regular season roster. I think the same about the Jazz, too. And also, I think for Memphis, they are really good, but they just lack that, the balance and the star talent to really go far in the playoffs. And so I think for that, Dallas has to be considered the favorite with the star power they have now. And what I really want to see, and I don't think we'll see this until the playoffs because I don't think Brett will lock into any one rotation, but I want to see how he staggers his 3 main scoring threats, in Curry, Harden, and James. Does he still bring Curry, kind of more as like an off the bench type player, a player with the second units? Does he play LeBron with the second units? You know what I mean? I really want to see what he does, because any one of those 3 players can play on their own and still be a fantastic, player and still win games. So a lot to see there in Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a crazy situation they're in, really, and it's credit to Brett with the moves that he's made. But I mean, they've essentially can now run a sub matrix where every single minute of every single game they have a star out on the court who can just dominate the possessions and the play.
They could have two out at any given moment of any given time.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty easily, and not to overshadow the fact that their supporting cast includes defensive center Bismack Biyombo, and Serge Ibaka, who's still a really good player, and then you've got some specialists beyond that, but their top 5 is pretty formidable. So and then on the other side of this trade, I said earlier that I think that we haven't seen stars get traded for close to fair value. I think Harden got traded for very close to fair value here. The difference between Harden and Wall is not huge. There is a big difference because Harden is a superstar who can carry a team by himself, whereas I think John Wall can't quite do that. And I think, but then on top of that, they get Kristaps Porzingis, who Brett is obviously very high on. Obviously has great potentials. He could easily turn out to be probably like a top 20 player. I'm not sure he can get too much higher above that, just based on how big men are treated in this game. But he could probably get up to the top 20, maybe top 10. So what they end up doing was they end up getting some really good players back, and I think that's huge. And what's really surprising to me is I've seen quite a few people in the trade chatter say like, oh yeah, they got John Wall, and like, he's not expiring and he's kind of older, so I guess that's kind of cool, I guess. I'm like, dude, John Wall they shouldn't want him to be expiring. You want a player like John Wall on your team because he's a star. The worst thing you could say about it all is that, well, maybe Houston can trade John Wall for another package of really good pieces or really good players.
Yeah, I mean that you sort of touched on earlier when you were talking about it, but the difference is, so obviously Harden's, in my opinion, Harden's slightly better than John Wall, not necessarily because of his ratings, but because he can play any position on the court. We've seen him play centre, we've seen him play 4, 3, 2, 1. He can play anywhere. So for Brett and Dallas, that's going to be fantastic because they can literally just move him around. For Houston, on the other hand, I mean, John Wall is pretty much a point guard and a point guard only. Yes, he is a really, really, really good point guard. Let's not deny that. But they're not going to have that flexibility. Obviously, they're getting Porzingis in the deal, who, for me, you touched on it as well, that he looks like he's going to become a really good player, but with this engine, how effective he's going to be, I'm not too sure. He has some great ratings and he seems to put up some relatively good numbers already, but the difference between, in my opinion, him going from where he is now and to being probably an all-star is he'll probably get that jump, but for him going from that all-star to being one of the top 20 players in the league, I'm not sure whether that will happen. Just because of his positional his ratings and his height and weight, whether he can't play a couple of positions, and I don't feel that he's going to get there in the engine. I think if we were playing in a different sim engine, absolutely he'd become a star, but we've seen in DDS games and in this one that it's very, very difficult to make build a team around a really, really good, basically power forward. It's really difficult to do. You tend to build your teams around guards and around wing players who can play a couple of positions. So, like you said, I think it's fair value what they got in the deal for Harden. And if I'm Houston, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, I'm not going to drop that much. Wall's going to be just as good as Harden. I might not be able to play people around in different positions as much. But I'm really relying on Porzingis becoming a really good player.
Yeah, I mean, that's both these trades rely on a bit of an unknown. Your trade relies on that Minnesota pick, not just that it, a lot of people are like, well, it's only worth it if it's number 1. It's more about obviously the player that you get with that pick. That's going to make a big difference. And then for Houston, how Kristaps turns out and / what they get out of John Wall, whether that's a couple of years of really good performance or whether they trade him, whatever it is, what their return is for John Wall, those things are really going to matter. And both those things are kind of a little bit of an unknown. That's really going to determine like how we view this trade in a couple of years. Because if Kristaps busts and if that pick, you pick some crappy player with it or whatever, obviously these trades are going to look very, very different in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's worth a shout out to Memphis, who seem to, in most of the big deals, seem to just have like a tagline of just like additional moves. So the small move that they made, getting sending Bogdanovic and getting McDaniels back, just a kudos for them. They just seem to really love being involved with huge trades that happen that we discuss.
Yeah, and I think this one really works for them. Bogdanovic is the better offensive player, but I don't know if he's really all that special as far as an offensive player goes. McDaniels isn't bad offensively. He's not as good, but he can still shoot the three ball okay, but he's great defensively, and we know Andre. We know that's important, and we know that he knows how to utilize defensive players. And so I think this trade really works for them. Not much more needs to be said there.
No. I think it kind of highlights how Memphis seem to always overperform, because they seem to get small deals like this that they seem to turn around into something of value to their roster. So I don't expect any different with this, to be honest with you. So they're the two sort of big trades that have happened. There was another sort of, I call it a semi-big trade, because there were some good players that moved team, not on the scale of Durant and Harden, but there was a deal that involved Utah and Boston originally, and then Utah, LA Lakers, Boston, and there's obviously a little bit of controversy around unprotected picks, protected picks, and I wanted to sort of talk about this one because obviously you were quite vocal on the forum about your viewpoint on this, and I mean, for those who haven't sort of been around this weekend and have missed everything, so the Utah Jazz sent essentially what was going to be just Gordon and a first round pick to Boston for Kenneth Faried. Turned out that basically Utah couldn't trade that pick because they had a protection on their pick in 2021, which the Lakers owned. So basically, in order to do this deal, they had to engage with the Lakers and agree with them to basically take that protection off the pick so they could trade their 2022 pick. It ended up working in the end. Tim seems to have got, I'm not even going to know how to pronounce that name, but Caleb Whiskey, something like that, out of the deal. But I think we'll talk about the deal in itself in a minute, but the whole deal around taking protections off picks and talking to the team that owned the pick, I mean, you had a viewpoint on it, and I think it's probably interesting with the guys who are watching for you to share that, really, because there was a lot of debate around the forum of whether basically the mother team should be allowed to sort of do that, or the team that's holding the pick should be able to sort of basically hold that team to ransom or not, when they're sort of having negotiations like this.
Yeah. So earlier I said that your trade with Chicago generated the most discussion. I think obviously this trade generated the most discussion. I think yours was the most like trade related discussion, whereas this one just all kinds of different kinds of discussion came about. I think the most important thing when it comes to thinking about the pick protection is that the original team, the mother team, I guess is how we refer to it. I don't think that they should be unilaterally able to modify the protection after trading the pick. And that goes in any direction, right? Obviously, we're talking about releasing protection, but we'd have a similar conversation if the team suddenly tried to put on protection. I think that it goes both ways. Obviously, a team trying to put on protection won't ever try to happen because we all know that you can't do that. I think similarly, we should all know that you can't release the protection, but that isn't as intuitively obvious, right? Like, it's obvious to us that we can't add protection once the pick has been traded. But it goes both ways. That is no longer your pick with which you can make modifications. right? You agreed to trade that pick away with certain, rules attached to it. That's how it is, and obviously we've seen in the past that teams are willing to discuss modifying that pick. But I think that, it does come, it comes at a cost if the GM wants it to come at a cost, right? Like, I had a trade earlier in this year with the Phoenix Suns because they needed me to release protection on their pick, because for some reason they put top 5 protection on their pick, and that pick is probably going to be the last pick of the first round. But Doug came to me and offered me second round picks to do it. And so I took those second round picks. In all honesty, I probably would have done it anyway if Doug had just asked nicely, because it didn't matter to me. It was not going to be top 5 in any sense, way, or shape. So whatever it was, I was getting the pick this year. The Lakers were well within their right to ask for compensation in order to release the protection. Utah was well within their right to be frustrated about that, because at the same time, it's up to the GMs, right? Tim could have easily agreed to just release the protection on the pick, but at the same time, that didn't make sense for what he wanted from that pick. He was counting on it, I think, being protected. I think he wanted it to be the 2022 first-round pick after it had fallen under protection. So for him, it makes more sense to do it the way they did it after the fact, which was him getting the 2022 first and Boston getting the 2021 first-round pick. So I just think that the main thing that we all have to understand here is that we all have to agree on it. However you want to modify it, your pick, like you and the team that owns your pick, you have to agree on the modification.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with what you said there. I mean, it kind of comes down to sort of the conversation you have with the mother team, really, when you're discussing things like this. I mean, it kind of probably highlights the restrictions that you do have if you put protections on a pick, because I think a lot of people just automatically think, oh yeah, I'll put top 20 restriction on that pick, I'll put top 15, top 5, whatever. But realistically, if you know your team is not going to ever end up in sort of the top 5, like the Phoenix one you said, for example, then there's probably an argument of just not putting a protection on that pick, because it basically restricts you and you can't move the following pick after that. And if you do, then you can basically, the team that you've traded to can hold out for more assets that they probably wouldn't have ever been able to acquire in the first place. So yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting topic to touch on, and it's been one that's been discussed a lot on the forum around whether teams can hold other teams to ransom for it. I mean, if I was in Tim's situation, I would absolutely be saying no. The reason I did that deal was because I wanted that later year pick, because we know Utah are performing really well this year. There might be a possibility that they decline in 2022, that he might have more of a chance. I mean, now he's looking at he might get in 2023. I mean, that for me, it's bizarre that Utah have done that again, because they're going to have the same situation next year if they're looking to make another move and they're looking to move a first round pick. They're going to have to basically again go back to Tim and the Lakers and negotiate again. I mean, Tim's probably must be laughing at this, because I mean, Utah will probably be in a situation again next year. They're going to have a good team. They're probably going to be looking at minor moves or looking at moving something, and that first round pick probably would have been valuable for them to move. But they're going to be in the same situation again. So we'll see how it goes next year. But interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing, you kind of touched on whether you should protect your pick or not. I think it just comes down to just be smart, right? Like, understand your situation, understand what you're probably going to do in the future, and just be smart about how you protect your picks. I think that there's still merit to protecting your picks, and I still think that people should absolutely be looking to protect their pick when it makes sense, right? And if I trade any of my future first, which if I do, someone please fire me. But if I ever trade a future first, I should hope that I trade it with some form of protection on it, because odds are I will be needing it. But it comes down to just being smart about it. If you know your team that is most likely going to trade your first round picks in the future, right? Like, for example, take Utah. Kevin talks all the time online about how his future first don't matter as much to him. He's not patient. He would rather have the contributing player now than wait for his 2022 first to come around. Okay, great. Not a problem with that. That's a totally fine way of going about your business. However, now, because he protected that 2022 first, like you said, he's going to come across the same issue if he tries to, when he's eligible to, trade, a 2023 or 2024 first-round pick. That maybe is a year from now that Kevin has to deal with that problem. But the fact is that that's something he will have to deal with. And so, for me, if I'm a GM that I say I don't care about future first-rounders, whatever, it's not going to matter, I don't need it, then just unprotect it so that it doesn't come up again.
Yeah, that's my thought with this one, absolutely. So, in terms of the actual deal, the Jazz moved what was essentially Aaron Gordon and a first-round pick to pick up Kenneth Faried. What are your thoughts on that? Faried has played centre pretty much most of his career, and he's now probably going to be expected to play at the 4, I imagine now, with DeAndre Jordan playing at centre. So, do you think it will work? Do you think it will give the Jazz much of an upgrade as they sort of look to try and make progress in the playoffs? Or do we think this is perhaps a sideways move that won't have as much impact as the Jazz are hoping for?
So, all this talk about all the picks and whatnot, I think Utah wins this deal. I think that trading Aaron Gordon for Kenneth Faried, at least in a vacuum, pure talent is definitely an upgrade, and I don't think there's any two ways about it. Faried is an absolute monster. He's a great player down there in Boston. Dennis made it very clear that he thought Faried should have been the starter in the East, and I think he's got a point. I think that Faried, has shown that he's a top level big man in this league. I think that Aaron Gordon is a fantastic player. I don't think that he can say half of what Faried can say about the production level so far in the league. Faried's a better rebounder. He's as good of a defender. Their scoring, I think, is similar if you look at ratings, but in game, there's no question that Faried is the better scorer. Now, with all that said, there are some people who know better than I the impact of a player at power forward versus the impact of a player at center. And if it were me and I was Utah, Faried would play every single minute at center that DeAndre Jordan doesn't play. Right? So right now, DeAndre Jordan is getting 27 minutes per game at center. Part of that is mostly due to fouls. I'm sure that Kevin would like to get more out of him at center, but just can't. So I would play Faried 21 minutes a game at center. And I would also play Faried as the starting power forward, but I would take him or Jordan out early and then move Faried over to center. Kind of how some people do that with their point guard or in other positions where like the backup plays two different positions. I think Faried should be playing two different positions because I think he is at his best when he's the center. But obviously, DeAndre Jordan has to play center. So that's what I think Utah should do. I think that they would be great if they did that. I think they are definitely in contention as a title hopeful team out of the West, and I think Faried takes them one step closer to that.
Yeah, I'm a huge Faried fan, and I think the whole reason why Houston have gone from being an elite Western Conference team to being essentially a borderline playoff team now is because they made that move to basically trade Faried. He's one of those players who he puts up good numbers, but his impact on the team in DDS just seems to be unrivaled to some of the other players who are playing similar positions to him. So I think it's a huge upgrade to Utah, and exactly like you said, I would play him at centre as much as possible around DeAndre Jordan and basically play him at the 4 at the other times that he can't play centre. He's a big upgrade over Gordon. Like you said, because he's just a rebounding monster and he scores really effectively, and I'll be really interested to see how Utah do now, because I think that trade probably puts them back up another step. It's probably a minor step, but it probably puts them back up into contention with that top 3, pushing on that door now. Looking at their starting 5, they're going to have Drew Holiday, who not the best point guard, but he's a good defensive point guard. Exum, who we know is an absolute all-star really good young player. Parsons, who's been a revelation since he came to the Jazz. Then they're probably going to play Fareed and Jordan. I mean, that is going to be a terrifying starting five. So, be really interesting to see. I expect them to be comfortably in the playoffs. With the likes of the Suns having injuries and things, they could go further than most people were anticipating, providing they get the matchups right.
Yeah, this is a really good team, and I think at the very least they have made themselves, given themselves a better chance against the top three teams in the West. And if things align right, I think that they can now say that they have a chance to win a series against one of those three teams. It's still not likely, but it also wasn't likely that the Bulls beat the Suns last year in the finals, and we all know how that went. So I think as long as you have a fighter's chance, that's enough in the playoffs, and I think that Utah's given themselves a fighter's chance. On the flip side of this, Boston just got a hell of a lot younger. Fareed's 30. He was expiring, which meant if Boston wanted to keep him, they were going to have to pay him until he was 33 or 34, and that's something that Utah's going to have to pay attention to, is this offseason they're going to want to re-sign him. Obviously they just got off Aaron Gordon's long-term salary, so they can refill it, with Fareed's salary, and they'd be in just the same position. But instead of paying a guy through his age 25 and 26 and 27 seasons like they would with Gordon, they're now going to pay Fareed at ages 31, 32, 33. And we all know that's around the time when players start to drop off. Some drop off faster than others, so we'll see what happens there. But for Boston, they don't have to face that dilemma. They get a really good player in Aaron Gordon. Not as good as Fareed, but a lot younger, under control for 2 more seasons. And they get a first-round pick next year. Worst case scenario for Boston, that pick is in the low 20s. Because Utah's probably in around the same position standings-wise next season as they are this season. Best case scenario, Fareed walks or completely falls off a cliff. They struggle with only now 4 really good players, and Boston now has themselves a lottery pick. I think that's a great trade to make if you're looking at a guy that you're not even sure you want to re-sign in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And for Boston, I think they probably have the smallest front court now, in Gordon and Anderson. I mean, I'm just going to pull up and have a quick look at the height of Anderson, because I think he's quite undersized as well, isn't he? But a 6'9" centre and a 6'7" power forward. So they basically are the small ball team in the CSL at the moment. But yeah, I mean, in terms of Boston's view on this, they get yet another first round pick. They seem to just have a whole host of them now, and a lot of it's going to be down to whether Dennis utilises those first round picks, because they've moved a lot of talent recently, and with Gordon, obviously, yes, they get younger. They may lose a little bit of a step because Fareed's the better player, but it's whether those first round picks they get the assets in that they want, and start to improve from there. I mean, we say improve, they're 33 and 20, and they're looking like they could be a playoff shout within the East. So it's not really a massive downgrade. So be interested to see how that does. For the Lakers, we kind of touched on. They get that 2022 pick, or probably if all hell goes in the Jazz, then they get the 2023 pick. So for Tim, who's essentially rebuilding, it's yet another first round pick. Obviously they had one originally, but they get that, and they get a shot at, I can't even say the guy's name, but Kaleb Tarsesweski, or however you pronounce it. And I don't, be honest with you, I know absolutely nothing about him, so I'm going to pull him up now and have a quick look. Do you have any ideas of what he's like? Or
I don't think he's anything special. I think that it's just a warm body. I think that it's a flyer. It's a young player who has a chance at being something worth playing. But I don't think that that was really the main thing. I think that a big thing though for Tim is that now he's guaranteed to get that pick in 2022, which is I think what he wanted originally. And now that's where it looks like he'll get the pick. So I think it works out best for him, for his timeline and his rebuilding window. So, whether I think it's Tarzuski. I think is how you pronounce it. I think the C is silent. I think that Tim maybe gets a half decent backup big man out of it, but I don't think that's the emphasis, really.
Yeah, I mean, just pulled up his player card here, and so far this season, I mean, he's putting up some okay numbers. He's not playing that many minutes. He's shooting okay, so perhaps it's just a flyer to see how he develops and whether he can be a backup big for the Lakers. I don't see anything more than that really out of him. So I guess in terms of trades, I think we've probably covered the big ones. Are there any others that you sort of are crying out to you that you think we probably have missed that we need to cover? I mean, there's a couple of minor deals with New York and Toronto where I think they moved DeRozan over there. Cleveland, Dallas, I think was a minor move, and there was another minor move with Toronto and Utah, I think, as well. Any thoughts on any of those you want to chat about?
I don't think there's really anything that needs to be said that wasn't already said online. I think that we'll see probably a couple more moves along those lines today. I don't expect to see anything bigger than that. So we got the big bang out of the way this weekend, and obviously a lot of activity and a lot to be seen these next couple of months in terms of how it all plays out on the court.
Yeah, and like you said, there's still a few hours left before the trade deadline, so we might see something. We touched on who we might see move, but I think we've seen the biggest trades of the deadline go down now. It's about seeing how it all sort of plays out for those teams affected, really.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we sort of wrap things up, the only thing I want to sort of just draw people's attention to, obviously you've been doing these 5 burning questions by division that have been going through, and you've covered a couple of divisions now and a couple of questions for each one. I mean, which one for you is the biggest one that you stand out as the biggest burning question that is facing a team or a division in particular at the moment?
That's a really good question, because for each division I tried to do one for each team, and I tried to really think about like what really matters to that team. I think for me, some of the really big ones are going to be, can Cleveland really make that push towards the top of the division? They have a really, really good team, and I think that if they can get into that top 4, which I think is more likely now with Chicago GM-less and Boston taking a step back, I think that could be huge for them and for the playoff picture on the whole. I think that's the biggest one that I've really kind of tackled so far, because the other one was who wins the Atlantic, but I think Toronto runs away with it now.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, that's interesting, because I think Cleveland are probably one of the sort of surprise winners out of all of this deadline deal happenings. Really, I mean, they wouldn't be, I think, if Chicago weren't GM-less, but they're sitting with 31 and 20. They're all healthy now. They've got their starting 5 back. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if they do make that push right the way up in the sort of the central division, really, whether they can get above the Pacers and the Bulls now, because they're sitting three games back or so from them, and yeah, I mean that could make or break their season if they can get up there and sort of get into that sort of top sort of couple of positions. That could really help their playoff seeding and could help their matchups, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Coach Ferry, thank you so much for having me on. It was a real pleasure, and I always love being on these with you, and we'll definitely do one again. This is kind of my regular spot, so we'll be on again sometime, and best of luck to your team the rest of the way.
Yeah, no problem. Great having you on, and when there's the next big issue to discuss, we'll certainly have you back on.
Sounds good. Thanks, Coach Fury.
Bye.